Hi, good evening everyone, and welcome to the National Society of Parliamentarians or NSP Town Hall, where we aim to incite discourse and debate on the most pertinent issues of the day. This forum will also be streamed on Squeeze, and now you know. Join us tonight as we examine the ABS-CBN shutdown and other attacks and threats against journalists under the ongoing national health emergency. Our guest tonight is an associate professor at the Department of Journalism of the UP College of Mass Communication and the editor of Media Asia, a peer-reviewed quarterly journal. He is a faculty affiliate of the Center of International Studies of UP Diliman and a special lecturer of journalism at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, Santa Mesa. Prior to teaching full-time at UP Diliman, he was editor-in-chief and head of research of Ibon Foundation, an independent research think tank. He also taught at the De La Salle University, Manila. Our guest tonight is Professor Danilo Araw. Magandang gabi, sir.
Magandang gabi po sa inyo at sa lahat ng mga nanonood ng webcast.
Okay, sir. Sige po, sir, we understand meron po kayong presentation na na-prepare. Sige po.
Sige. So, if you can see on the screen, so without much delay, we will discuss press freedom under lockdown. So, of course, the key word here is note on press freedom under lockdown because this is just an overview of what's happening. So, for the next 15 minutes or so, I will try to give you an idea of what is happening under the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly the lockdown that was imposed by the Duterte administration. So if you look at the next slide, so basically we start with the definition. As in any discussion, we want to know first or have an idea of what press freedom is. So it has been said time and again that press freedom is a cornerstone of democracy. In other words, a democratic state cannot exist if there is absence of press freedom. So it is an important foundation. Press freedom also allows two things. Number one, it allows journalists to do their job in terms of reporting and interpreting the news, but keeping in mind the ethical standards as well as the professional standards that go with the profession. Number two, news media organizations should be able to operate freely if there is press freedom, and there should be no government intervention whatsoever in terms of management, control, and the delivery of content. Of course, there are certain regulations that would have to be observed, like registration as a business and other technical requirements in putting up a group, a media group or a news media organization. But for the most part, there should be freedom to operate in terms of delivery of content. And related to that would be two important elements of press freedom. First would be editorial independence. So what do we mean by editorial independence? It simply means that the journalists and the gatekeepers, when we say gatekeepers, these are the editors, and to some extent, the owners would sometimes intervene, and it would not be good sometimes in terms of operation, because sometimes owners tend to compromise editorial independence, but nevertheless, again, we repeat, there should be no government intervention in terms of editorial content. That's the bottom line. Number two, there is a self-regulatory atmosphere. Actually, there are a lot of elements when it comes to press freedom, but self-regulation and editorial independence would be two of the most important elements. Now, just as a last word regarding self-regulation, this simply means that the media should be able to police their own ranks. As I mentioned a while ago, ownership may interfere with editorial independence because sometimes the owners would say that this is what I want, but it may go against, let's say, objectivity in treating a particular issue. So if cases like that would happen, the media should be able to police their own ranks. In other words, if there are errors, if there are certain breaches in ethics for a particular news media organization, the media sector itself will call out or criticize constructively a particular news media organization. So that's how things should work. Last part about press freedom before we go to the meat of our discussion. Press freedom ensures an informed, critical, and empowered citizenry. So what's clear is that press freedom is not just for journalists. Press freedom is for all of us because without press freedom, you wouldn't be able to help in the proper shaping of public opinion by providing only the most relevant information. Now, after defining press freedom, perhaps we should look at selected issues related to the lockdown resulting from COVID-19. So at first glance, this may look like a harmless or tertiary issue taking care of the people's health, right? Mass testing, making sure that those who are afflicted with the virus would be cured. But as mentioned by no less than the United Nations during the World Press Freedom Day last May 3, journalism is also an antidote to the pandemic of disinformation. So this particular infodemic that is happening right now can be cured by proper practice of the profession. So some media issues would be important, therefore, to tackle at this particular time. Number one, we want to talk about media accreditation for journalists and media workers who want to go to quarantine areas. So as early as the second week of March, there had been impositions on the part of the PCOO and the IATF in such a way that only those with accreditation can go to quarantine areas. So this was opposed by many media groups saying that a press ID should be more than enough and that sometimes media accreditation would result in discrimination or selectivity on the part of the government in terms of choosing the journalists and media workers who will be given ID passes or accreditation cards. Number two, there was an imposition prohibiting journalists from privately owned media inside the press briefing room of Malacanang Palace. So again, it may look like a prohibitive or a preventive move on the part of Malacanang to secure the safety of the officials so that the virus wouldn't spread. But sometimes you would wonder, why is it that in countries like New Zealand, Canada, or even in the United States, journalists can still go and confront directly their sources of information, even at the seat of power, even while they're observing certain protocols like physical distancing. But here, you are prohibiting journalists and you only entertain phone-in questions. So there's no direct face-to-face confrontation. So sometimes you begin to wonder, why is that the case? Number three, related also to point number two would be the virtual pressers that are being organized by different agencies, wherein questions are pre-screened. And you know that with screened questions, sometimes the hard questions may either be ignored or you give enough time to those who will answer the hard questions to prepare certain certain scripts so that they can get away with evading directly the questions that should be answered. Section 6 of Republic Act 11469, which is also called the Bayanihan to Ill as One Act, seeks to penalize those who are spreading false information. So at first glance, it may look like it's harmless, and some people would even say it's useful, especially for those who are guilty of rumor mongering, like your neighbor, for example. But if you think about it, if you don't define properly the meaning of false information, anything and everything can be considered as such. And this is the reason why sometimes for a certain local government unit, let's not mention this particular place, but sometimes the governor would have the excuse to summon certain residents to the office of the governor to ask why certain negative criticisms are being hurled against the local government in the guise of trying to check against the spread of false information. Or sometimes the National Bureau of Investigation would go after those posting on social media, and then they would be asking, why is it that you are posting such content? So such situation excuse me, should be properly analyzed. So the last point before we go to the next slide would be, it's a very, very serious issue of red baiting of journalists and media groups. So even up to now, red baiting continues. So it happened even before the lockdown, and it's still happening now. Most especially, just a few days ago, we may have heard of the statements of Lieutenant General Antonio Parlade and the National Task Force to end the the movement to end communist insurgency, the NTF LCAC, right, and local communism or something to that effect. At any rate, such a statement coming from these groups would seek to say something to would would tend to say words to the effect that those who are saying that the ABS-CBN franchise issue is a press freedom issue would be those who are riding on that particular concern, and that those who are riding on or freeloading, as they say, to use the word of Parlade, would be those who belong to certain communist fronts. Which now brings us to the burning issue of the day, which is what happened last May 5. A very, very important issue here would be the forced closure of ABS-CBN by the National Telecommunications Commission by virtue of what is called the cease and desist order. So basically, in not so many words, ABS-CBN's franchise has already expired. So legally speaking, there is no reason allegedly for ABS-CBN to continue its operations. So that would explain why Free TV Channel 2, DZMM, and MOR station, as well as the other provincial stations carrying such content had to close. Related to May 5, on the same day, there was the killing of Cornelio Pepino, a radio journalist who's based in Dumaguete City. In case you don't know, he was killed in cold blood. To be specific, he was shot 5 times and he died on the spot. So this marks actually the death of press freedom. Of course, some people would say, aren't we exaggerating? Of course, these are tragic, the closure of a network and then the killing of a journalist, but aren't we overacting? Aren't we just simply saying that there is a decline in press freedom, but press freedom is still alive and well? Okay, let me explain briefly. Actually, to answer why is press freedom dead, we only need to use 2 words, chilling effect. So when we say chilling effect, it is basically a dimension of what we call culture of impunity. So just a brief explanation of what culture of impunity is. Culture of impunity happens when there are people or there are groups that can get away with anything, including the killing of certain groups or certain individuals or their perceived enemies. So how can they get away with it? Because they are powerful enough to evade arrest, detention, or even prosecution or conviction for whatever crime they commit. And in fact, what is supposed to be illegal becomes legal in a regime of culture of impunity. So that's why the word culture is used. It may not be innate in the local culture, but impunity becomes part of the way of life, not because the people want it, but because those in power can impose that particular reign of terror or that particular reign of illegal activity. So with chilling effect, it sends, so whatever happens would send shivers down the spine of journalists. So in the case of ABS-CBN, what would be the shivers? Of course, the question, who would be next? If it can happen to a giant network, what more to the other news media organizations, especially in the provinces. So maybe if they don't pull their punches, they might end up like ABS-CBN. In other words, they cannot afford to be so critical of the administration, otherwise they would incur the ire of the powers that be. So it is in that kind of chilling effect that we argue the death of press freedom. Because sometimes you would ask what kind of journalism would be practiced with the closure of ABS-CBN. Everybody might be afraid. Of course, there will still be criticism, but you will try to either telegraph your punches, hold your punches all together, or maybe you would just kill the story and then just tackle certain issues from a more quote unquote positive angle or from a more favorable angle to the government. That's one reason for why press freedom is dead. Second, in the context of press freedom, please let us keep in mind that if you attack one, it is considered an attack on everybody else. An attack on one is an attack on all. You mess with ABS-CBN, you mess practically with the others. This concept is somewhat related to chilling effect in the sense that there is that worry that when you attack one, so indirectly you are sending a message to others that this might happen to you also if you don't get yourself together. And by getting yourself together, it means that you should only be favoring the side of the powers that be. The third dimension that we need to keep in mind would be the concept of weaponization. If laws are weaponized, then attacks would become somewhat legal. For example, franchise renewal is supposed to be a technical and routinary issue for many news media organizations. But now, it's being weaponized. Before the lockdown, and even during the 1930s and 1940s, I can tell you, in theory, libel is supposed to be a form of check and balance to ensure that the journalists would do their jobs well. Because if there is the threat of being sued for libel, then you will try your best to be as ethical as possible in practicing journalism. But libel, as we all know, has become weaponized, even dating back to the Abbas de la Rapiña case, where Dean Worcester sued for libel the likes of T.M. Talaw, right? Because of an editorial which did not even identify Dean Worcester. So that kind of weaponization has been there. But under the current lockdown, we see the weaponization of franchise renewal. We see the weaponization of media accreditation. And we even see the weaponization of the recently passed Bayanihan to Heal as One Act. And in the context of press freedom, we have to look at Section 6, right, regarding the spread of false information. Because all of this would tend to give a message to the media that these are the things that we can use against you. So the law, instead of preserving law and order, or peace and order rather, it's presenting a state of disorder in terms of the practice of journalism. And with that, we see the exacerbation of impunity. Practically anybody can get away with it. We all remember, fresh from our minds, what happened during the birthday party of a certain police officer, right? A high-ranking one. So we see the fact that apparently he might get away with it. But of course, we give credit to public pressure because I understand that charges will finally be filed against him. Charges might be filed against him. So this kind of impunity would show how privilege gets into the picture insofar as those in power would be concerned. And of course, the perpetuation of tyranny. Please let us not forget, the one ultimately responsible for the closure of ABS-CBN is not NTC, it's not the OSG or the Office of the Solicitor General, it is the person who once said, I'm sorry, but you'll be out. If you are thinking that you'll be renewing your franchise, I'm sorry to say, but you're out. And we all know the person who said words to that effect, right? Anyway, I won't spoil it for you. It's no less than President Rodrigo Duterte. So I'm sorry to say he is ultimately responsible. And that kind of perpetuation happens when sometimes there are people who would criticize the MPC and even Kalida of the Office of the Solicitor General, but would fall short of putting the blame on the President himself. When in fact, it is recorded, it is a matter of public record that he doesn't like ABS-CBN and that the Office of the Solicitor General and the Office of the President are working closely together through and through. And the NTC as well, which is an attached agency of the DICT. But for the longest time, NTC was under the Office of the President. So regardless of the change in organizational structure, they're still government agencies, and the head of government is the President himself. So of course, there are some counter arguments that we may want to consider here. For example, there are those who argue that it's not really a press freedom issue with regard to ABS-CBN because it concerns certain violations of the law. I will not discuss in detail already the answers of ABS-CBN because after all, I am not the spokesperson of ABS-CBN. They've answered all of these things already. But all I can say with this particular argument is that we have to appreciate the role of media. Of course, ABS-CBN is a business. Of course, it is owned by oligarchs. We're not denying that it's a business and that the Lopezes are part of the oligarchy and that the oligarchy is far from perfect in terms of its function in society. And in fact, we can even argue that they are part of the exploiters of the poor, right? We can argue along that line. But the services provided by ABS-CBN would be information. Okay? Of course, there's entertainment. But if you look at the news and current affairs programs, they provide information. And if you deprive people of information, especially at this time where they need the information, then there is a problem. Most especially considering that as a leading network, government should maximize the reach of in terms of listenership and viewership so that they can get the message across. Government cannot just expect from government media. No one watches PTV4. Perhaps the only exception is there's a lotto draw, right? So that's the time that they get higher rating. But other than that, they have to realize the need for ABS-CBN. Number two, this is true. Legislative franchise is a privilege. That's true because there is a need to regulate the airwaves because of the kind of terrestrial technology wherein we have to ensure that airwaves will not be so cluttered with so many networks or so with so many signals being used. It is a privilege, yes, but if you juxtapose it with press freedom, we go back to the weaponization of the legislative franchise. Yes, it is a privilege, but it is in the context of regulating only the airwaves. That's it. It is not to the wishes of the powers that be as to who should get the desired signal or the desired frequency that's available. So we have to consider that along the lines of press freedom because only then can we appreciate the concept of such weaponization. As I told you a while ago, under ordinary circumstances, I will tell you that that legislative franchise is just simply a technical job. Okay? And if there is a dispute between which station should get what signal or what frequency, then that will be the time that there will be an evaluation as to who is more qualified than the others. But under ordinary circumstances, there should be space for all applications. Number three, ABS-CBN is not the only broadcast station. There are still others. Actually, I can even argue with you that there are still thousands of others. If you look at the Philippine Media Factbook, there exists not just national media, but also community media. And they go by the thousands, I can tell you right now. But again, if you attack one, you attack the other. That's where chilling effect becomes an important factor to consider here. Of course, those who used to listen or watch ABS-CBN programs would end up transferring to other networks. That's also true. But what happens here is that it is the government that is imposing that particular choice for people. In other words, you are limiting the choices. In a democracy, what's true for media would be the more the merrier. The more media organizations we have, the more vibrant our democracy. And the more critical they are, the more vibrant still would become our the democracy that informs society. So we have to keep that in mind. Fourth point, ABS-CBN is still broadcasting online. I think we all know what TV Patrol is doing, right? So they're transferred digitally, so everything should be fine. No, for the simple reason that again, ABS-CBN is being made to or being coerced to broadcast online. It's not as if they chose to close their own network. The government did it for them. And that's what's unacceptable insofar as the government will be concerned. As I said, in the context of self-regulation, the likes of ABS-CBN and of course other news media organizations, they should be allowed to do what they want insofar as content delivery would be concerned. So again, it is the government that imposed upon ABS-CBN, no, you cannot function, you cannot operate your TV and radio facilities. So they were forced to broadcast online. Number five, of course, this is so easy to debunk. Press freedom is alive because people are still free to criticize. Actually, no. Because right now, the chilling effect extends not just to journalists, but also to the ordinary people. People, there are those who are being summoned to explain their posts on social media. So let me just give you some remarks about certain people who offered a bounty to kill the president. Because the NBI, upon the prodding of the Presidential Security Group, I understand, are investigating these people. If you offer 50 million or 100 million or whatever amount to kill someone, should it be taken seriously? Yes and no. Yes, it should be taken seriously if your net worth is equivalent to the bounty that you're imposing. So for example, if my net worth is 50 million and I offer that amount, then maybe it's a real threat, right? So it might be worth investigating. But if it is a teacher and a construction worker, while I don't know the personal circumstances of these people, I sincerely doubt if they have 50 million or 100 million in their pocket. Okay, literally or figuratively. Why? Because that's not because the state of affairs in the country would point that teaching and construction work are among the lowest paid professions in the country. So their money isn't good for it. No offense to both of them. But what we have to keep in mind would be the concept of protected speech. In the US, there is clear jurisprudence that even as early as the Vietnam War, when LBJ or Lyndon Johnson was being the subject of vile remarks by various anti-war activists, what is called then as rhetorical hyperbole or political hyperbole, they this was considered protected speech. So what do we mean by political hyperbole? Exaggeration, right? So if you say that if you are offering 50 million and you cannot afford it, what do you call it? It's a hyperbolic statement. And technically, it should be allowed, no matter how vile the comments may be. It's part of protected speech, whether we like it or not. What's needed now? Of course, this is my last point, second to the last slide for this particular conversation. We need to be creative as possible in terms of united actions. We can talk about parliamentary struggle, which is, I understand, the concern of this particular association. We can, talk to our favorite people in Congress or even in the Supreme Court to ensure that franchise renewal will be provided to ABS-CBN and that press freedom will be defended. And of course, there's also the extra legal components or what we call the parliament of the streets, right? Where there should be action that should be done. But of course, during the lockdown where mass gatherings are not allowed, we cannot run the risk of telling people to go out in the streets. So we might as well be creative, okay, through online protests or social media protests, right? Or Twitter rallies, if you may. But nevertheless, we cannot just act as individuals. We need to be united under one cause, under one organization, if you may. And of course, sustained public pressure would be most important here. 25-year franchise for ABS-CBN should be the goal. Much as there is a provisional franchise, again, we go back to the weaponization of laws. You can use the provisional franchise, of course, to buy time for ABS-CBN so that it can operate. That much is true. But you can also use it to keep it on a tight leash. In other words, in order for you to get your permanent 25-year franchise, you must make sure that what you report would be somewhat favorable to the government. Government doesn't need to tell them that because sometimes it is the message, right? The body language or the subtext behind such move. Of course, we have to continue denouncing red baiting, especially in a situation where being accused of being a sympathizer with a communist or being a communist yourself could get you arrested, detained, or even killed. So that is a real threat. So we have to denounce it. Ending impunity has been the long time call of various media groups as well as human rights organizations, press freedom defenders, and human rights defenders. So we have to ensure that we sustain the campaign to end impunity, and along with that would be the need to fight tyranny. Of course, as a last word, I should tell you that the death of press freedom is definitely there and it exists right now. Perhaps during the question and answer session, we can fully explain it further if you need certain clarification. But of course, the other points that we have to look at would be our responsibility to fight for press freedom because there is that particular absence due to the death of press freedom. So we have to continue fighting for it because, as mentioned a while ago, it is a cornerstone of democracy, and we have to make sure that democracy will be still existing in our society, and without press freedom, our democracy might also be compromised in the process. So I guess I should end my presentation with such last words, and I think we can now start with the questions uh, if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sir Danny Arrow, for that very informative and insightful presentation. No? Sir, siguro to start the discussion, this is not the first time that ABS-CBN faced closure, the first being during the martial law era. How is this different? This closure now with the Duterte administration with that of the Marcos regime?
Okay, good question. During the time of martial law, there was a clear imposition of martial law. Right now, we don't have it, right? So there is a semblance of democracy right now. But I think the same arguments have been raised against ABS-CBN, okay, in the past and even up to now, with some adjustments, okay? So during the time of the Marcoses, the kings of the Lopezes cropped up during that time. And even up to now, it's still being talked about.
Mhm.
But of course, we have to remember with the advances of technology, during the time of ABS-CBN, when they closed, they really closed. There was no other option but to really give up everything. So the Benedictos took over and they used the assets of ABS-CBN to further develop what was then called Broadcast City. Okay, that was Channel 9 and Channel 13. So with the advances of technology now, ABS-CBN is able to shift from TV and radio to digital. And right now, the government cannot do anything about it. My guess is that they would want ABS-CBN to totally close so that they can punish the owners for whatever lapses they may have in terms of, the failure to air the presidential advertisement, uh, uh, the advertisement during the presidential elections and all that. So there are certain differences, but again, the specter of martial law is very much common. But right now, what we have is something of a de facto martial law because what's common between Marcos and Duterte would be their authoritarian tendencies or their dictatorial ways.
Sir, before I proceed with my question po, okay lang po na yung sa share screen po. I-turn
Sorry?
yung
Sorry.
sa share screen po.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Sir, interesting po yung point ninyo kanina about self-regulation, and as a former student at the UP College of Mass Communication, naalala ko po yun sa mga classes namin on the political economy of the mass media. Pero ang interesting po ngayon na pag-usapan since nagiging argument po ngayon ng mga supporters ng shutdown regarding po sa bias. Actually, medyo misinformation nga yun kasi they claim na bias ang dahilan, though we can infer naman from the statements of the president na that's his case against ABS-CBN. Paano po talaga nag-work ang self-regulation within the media industry for our viewers para malaman po nila? Tsaka, how can we enhance yung self-regulation na to within the industry? Kasi as far as I remember po, sir, noong 2003 or early 2000s, may isa ring major network na nag-withdraw mula sa isang organization na in-establish for this particular purpose, which is yung kapisanan ng broadcaster ng Pilipinas. So, paano po siya nag-work, sir? And how can we enhance it?
Yeah. Of course, self-regulation works in various ways. First would be the most obvious, yung tinutukoy mo ng mga media groups wherein they are able to police their own ranks. So if you don't mind, I will mention specific groups. For example, the Philippine Press Institute would be the association of different print publishers. And most of the members are members of the community press, but there are some national papers that are part of it. So what they do is, for example, if there is a complaint against one particular newspaper, just to give a specific example, a letter to the editor wasn't published or carried by a particular newspaper. So what they do is they file a complaint, and then all the other papers would publish that particular letter to the editor, so that you can end up indirectly shaming this particular paper. So things like that. Now, the KBP or the Kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas also function like that for the TV and radio stations. Now, as I said, as you correctly mentioned, one particular network, a big one at that, pulled out of the membership. Let's not discuss the details anymore because it's a bit technical. But nevertheless, it provides the standards for compliance among broadcasters. For example, you cannot be a main host of a particular radio program if you don't have a KBP broadcaster's license. And to get the license, you need to pass an exam. So you need to have some knowledge regarding ethics, regarding normative standards of broadcasting, as well as journalism to do that. Now, that's one. Now, the other component of self-regulation would be what we call media criticism. So this is where media groups like the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism would be most important. Even the academe would be part of media criticism. So how does it work? We monitor media, and sometimes if there are certain good practices that are done, they are praised for the good practices. But if there are certain breaches in professional and ethical standards, they would not be allowed. It would be unacceptable, and they would have to be outright criticized for the bad things that they do. I'm sorry to say, and I wish to go on record here, most of the time we criticize media for the bad things that they do. That's how sometimes the running joke is that when you say media criticism, it's largely negative by example, but in practice. But I think that's how media works because we are our worst critics. We try to improve, and we cannot improve if we just look at everything that's positive. So that's why we are a bit hard on ourselves. And to the credit of of the many journalists and news media organizations, they accept criticism and they are willing to change. Uh, for as long as we do the criticisms constructively.
Mm, okay. Sige. Sir Danny, you argued kanina that press freedom is dead. Uh, sa tingin niyo po, what do you believe President Duterte is trying to achieve with his actions against ABS-CBN, even beyond giving him, saying it in his speeches na I will shut you down, I will close that when your time comes. Do you think there is a longer, more concrete plan with the administration that the closure of ABS-CBN is just the first step?
Well, let's look at it this way. The government is pushing for certain controversial measures that would be not so popular among people. So one of them would be federalism. And actually, that's one of the ironies right now in governance. Uh, right now, you have a president with high popularity ratings, but if you look at surveys on specific issues, most people are against charter change. Most people are against the shift in government. And to be more specific, many people are against federalism. So where do the media come in? If you have a compliant media or a subservient media, then it would be easier for the government to push for such unacceptable programs, and they can more or less help create a narrative wherein what should be unacceptable to people would suddenly become acceptable. So that would partly explain why Duterte at one time said that if ABS-CBN would support federalism, then Duterte would be willing to settle the case he wants to file against ABS-CBN or even to renew the franchise, right? So he did say that. So that's one. What does Duterte want from this particular issue? In terms of what Duterte wants for this particular issue. Number two, and I'm sorry to say this, Duterte wants all of media to operate like PTV4 and PNA. They want it to function like the government media right now, which doesn't really practice journalism, but instead it practices more pro-government propaganda. So he wants that kind of a setup wherein there is only a semblance of press freedom or a pretension of press freedom, but actually everybody is on a tight leash. So it's something like the acceptable form of martial law, where on paper everything is democratic, but in practice everything is tyrannical. So I think that's what Duterte wants.
Mhm. Pero sir, would you think that these actions that are being targeted for the media, would you think that these attacks against the press hamper their performance in delivering factual and credible and if sometimes critical news?
Okay, that's also a good question, quite interesting if I might add, because to the credit of many journalists, there are still journalists who remain critical and they try to fulfill their mission of being as objective as possible in delivering information. However, much as you might have individual journalists who still, keep the torch of press freedom burning, so to speak, can we say the same thing with the media owners who have their own interests to protect? And by interest, we mean not just political interest, but also business interest.
Mhm.
When you run the dominant media like a business wherein you would want it to make a profit, then as much as possible, you want to support the status quo. Right now, it might be attractive to media owners to be a little bit critical of Duterte because many audiences are disgusted with what happened to ABS-CBN. But what happens if the ABS-CBN issue dies down? What happens if, for example, the important issues that we discussed a while ago, that dating, impunity, etc., they are effectively swept under the rug by fake news and whatever false narratives the Duterte administration would be peddling. Then it will be quote unquote business as usual for the media owners. And sometimes the journalists, I really cannot blame them if they decide to toe the line. Because sometimes when you're pressured and you have a family to feed, you need to still maintain a decent salary to support yourself as well as your loved ones. Sometimes you are forced to toe the line, right? So the silver lining here is that there is alternative media that can help provide a more critical voice and would provide a voice to the voiceless, so to speak. It would still be as hard hitting as possible because there are no ownership or advertising trappings that would affect the operations of the alternative media. And I know this because I've been part of the alternative media practically, my whole life. So I know how it operates. However, I should be honest also to tell you that because of limited financial resources, there is a limit to the reach of the alternative media, and I cannot blame ordinary people if they haven't heard of the likes of Bulatlat, Weekly, Podo Productions, or maybe if they've heard of it, they may believe in the narrative of the government that these are communist funds because these are subjected to various red-baiting operations. So that's one silver lining. But of course, the bigger challenge is how do you increase the readership of this particular alternative media network? So that's a bigger challenge also.
Sir, yung next question po manggaling po sa akin. Kanina po na-mention po ninyo kanina and you recognize na our media environment is dominated by the oligarchs. In the case of the ABS-CBN issue and siguro sa maraming mga media corporations natin, mga conglomerates, there's this thin line between defending the oligarchy and defending press freedom. So how can we appropriately or adequately defend press freedom without actually defending the oligarchy? Kasi yan din po yung binabato ngayon ng mga supporters ng chapter.
Of course, yeah. And actually, it's a tough balancing act, if you ask me. The only thing to remember is we do not deny the excesses of certain media networks. ABS-CBN, to tell you the truth, is far from perfect. And actually, if you want to involve Rappler in the conversation, which is also being attacked by Duterte or even the Philippine Daily Inquirer, since they are part of the dominant media, they function like a business. And sometimes you would even question the business models of these particular groups, right? And their business interests. There are certain interlocking conflicts of interest. And sometimes even the hiring of journalists. I can tell you right now, not all ABS-CBN journalists are desirable. Okay? Desirable professionally, by the way. Okay? I don't want to get a sexual harassment from some people. Okay? So we're talking about unacceptability in terms of ethical practices. By all means, let's expose this. But right now, the fundamental issue is press freedom. We're not looking for the most perfect network so that their franchise will be renewed. No. We're talking about press freedom. And if there are certain excesses on the part of a network, it's not as if we're telling people just depend on ABS-CBN for the news that you want. No. If you watch ABS-CBN, you refer to GMA7, you refer to TV5, go to Rappler, go to Inquirer, Philstar, Bulletin, and all that. Try to your best to be as informed as possible so that you can look at the different angles of the story. So that's how we can try to ensure that what we're defending is press freedom and not the oligarchs. Because that's where the truth will be coming out. We cannot just ignore, and we have to acknowledge the excesses, particularly of the Lopezes on this particular point.
Sir, since we're talking about the media environment, at yun nga, since we have a lot of newspapers, but mga major newspapers and media establishments here in the country, Ang napansin ko po kasi, sir, actually curiosity ko na to since nag-start yung issue. Duterte or the president has been very active or vocal against his dislike for the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Rappler, and ABS-CBN. But there are also major newspapers. I don't know if I should name one of them. Major newspapers siya. Actually, doon kami nagsasubscribe. That happens to be nagpa-viral po siya dahil sa mga context na pinibuild niya around sa mga issues na controversial for the president. So, bakit naging selective kaya si Pangulong Duterte regarding dito? Meron siyang inaatake na may mga critical, may mga critical statements naman din about kay Duterte, pero hindi iwasan na yung iba.
Well, again, it all boils down to the need for a compliant media in an authoritarian regime. As I mentioned a while ago, Duterte is a bit ambitious in terms of pushing for a radical change of government. But his term of radical is one that would replace the system, but would still perpetuate political dynasty, political patronage, and would even lift the term limit of members of Congress or even the president himself, right? So those controversial measures would need the support of the people. And media would play a major role in terms of garnering that support. So you need a compliant media. So that's where selectivity becomes important for the president. So going back to your discussion about certain media organizations that would tend to support Duterte, again, it's ownership. That's an important factor there. One newspaper is published and owned by an international PR consultant of the president himself, right? So let's not mention that it's the Manila Times. Okay. Anyway, the other newspaper is owned by the Romualdezes, right? And we all know that the Romualdezes are allied with the Marcoses, and the Marcoses are allied with the Dutertes, right? So let's not mention it's the Manila Standard. So those newspapers you expect to be left alone. Okay? But don't get me wrong, let's be fair to the Manila Times and the Manila Standard. Sometimes there are critical articles that would be published. Okay? But they are few and far between. So to the credit of these people, of the journalists working in these newspapers, and I know some of them, I can tell you that there are responsible journalists there. But they are trying their best to toe the line. But for the most part, because it is owned by certain people, then you have a problem in terms of how to effectively operate. So that's why sometimes you can say it's the dynamism of media. Sometimes it is good that you have certain quote-unquote oligarchs that are part of the opposition. So sometimes the pro side would be balanced out by the anti side, right? Because the oligarchs that are critical of the administration would have their own businesses to protect, right? So that's why the challenge for ordinary people would be to read what you perceive to be pro-administration outlets and anti-administration outlets, and then you make up your mind. But of course, the clincher there or the game changer there would be the alternative media. If you want a more progressive analysis of burning issues of the day, I highly recommend that people read the alternative media. Actually, read them more than the dominant media, if I might interject.
Actually, sir, kanina, I was actually referring po to the Philippine Star. Kasi siguro, hindi naman siguro mag-issue sa ating mga viewers. Kasi yung Philippine Star has been very prominent recently because of their critique of the president. Pero unlike yung Philippine Inquirer, yung Rappler at ABS-CBN, hindi siya halos natitira sa mga press con. Do you think there's a reason why ganun siya?
Okay, yes. That's a good question again. Okay. Well, I would have wanted to avoid discussing Philippine Star because what is going through there is a little bit complicated. But okay, since you brought it up, let me tell you something that I know. In the Philippine Star, there is a mix of editors who are said to be, I'm sorry to say, so Duterte supporters, but there are those who are critical of the administration and are quite stalwarts of press freedom, as we know it. So there's that tension within the particular organization. But for the most part, of course, just like other dominant media, it functions as a business. Okay? And there are certain interests that cannot be touched. For example, we all know that the Philippine Star is owned by the Belmontes, right? And the Belmontes are part of a certain political dynasty. So, which is identified, let's say, if we use the DDS lingo, they are so-called Dilawans, right? Or the Yellows. Well, right now, there is that dynamic. So that's why it doesn't criticize much, let's say, the goings on in the Quezon City local government, right? Because the mayor happens to be a Del Monte. Although I should interject, from time to time, there would be articles critical of the Belmontes. But again, they are few and far between. So such things would have to be kept in mind. Now, of course, the visceral question, why is it that Duterte isn't going after the Philippine Star despite the sometimes the harsh criticism that would be leveled against him? It would take a content analysis to validate this particular point, but my guess is that the Philippine Star is not as harsh as Rappler or as harsh as the Inquirer or even ABS-CBN. That's just my guess, but it will have to be validated through a content analysis.
Hi, sir. Question po with regard to investigative journalism. Sa tingin niyo po, gaano kalaki yung epekto nitong ABS-CBN shutdown as well as what you mentioned a while ago with regard to the killing of journalists and other media-related problems arising from this administration? Ano yung nakikita niyo pong future with regard to investigative journalism in the Philippines?
Well, I'm sorry to be the harbinger of bad news here, but investigative journalism has been on the decline ever since. Well, ever since I can remember. The only outlets that are continuously publishing investigative reports would be the following. First will be obviously the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. We also have Verifiles. Every now and then, Newsbreak, which is a partner with Rappler, would also come up with its own share of investigative reports, even if these are relatively fewer in number. So the problem here is that as a business, sometimes the owners do not see the need to put a lot of resources on investigative journalists. Unlike in other US-based newspapers where you have the Spotlight Group, right, which became a movie, by the way. You have a Spotlight where you have a team of investigative journalists and they are given months to investigate a story. Here, there's not much. Of course, I should mention also GMA7's investigative documentaries or ID, right? So MABSCBN also had something like No Filter or one of those shows that would have its share of investigative documentaries. But other than that, they are few and far between. Again, it has to do with investing a lot of resources to make sure that stories would be coming out. Okay, that's one. Number two, sometimes there is that false sense of belief that the attention span of audiences are now low and that they do not appreciate long form narrative. Because an investigative story, sometimes it would be a two-part or a three-part story. In some cases, it will even be a five-part story. Each story would be about 1,500 to 2,000 words long, right? So if you do the math, so we're talking of about 6,000 to 10,000 words, okay? And it takes months to do that, especially if you're trying to be careful with the data and you're trying to be sure that everything would be, accurate. So you have to interview a lot of sources. So owners do not want to invest in that, number one. Number two, in terms of training of journalists, again, I'm sorry to say this, but right now, investigative journalism is just one course in the university. And in some cases, that particular course is even an elective. In other words, you can get a journalist, it's possible to get a journalism degree in other universities, even without taking up investigative journalism. So sometimes the training would be lacking in that respect. I'm not saying that you have to take this course in college in order to practice investigative journalism. Sometimes you can learn it on the field. But in the situation where there are only a few media organizations that do that, it becomes a big problem. So again, the quick answers there would be owner's interest with regard to investing in investigative journalism, and number two, the proper training that is afforded to journalists. And of course, the third would be the mistaken notion that audiences have a short attention span. But my theory here is that the media, if you want to raise the level of awareness of audiences, they can tolerate long form journalism. Okay, so sometimes it happens. Okay, people have the patience to sit through 400 pages of Harry Potter or even 400 pages of the Da Vinci Code, right? So if they can sit through that, then why not a well-written journalistic piece?
Mhm. Okay. Siguro sir, second to the last question na lang po, no? Naririnig natin ngayon yung phrasing na new normal sa economy, sa social services, sa health, sa transportation. Sa Philippine press po, sa tingin niyo po, what is and or what should be the new normal for the Philippine press?
We're looking at the new normal right now where most of the things that we're doing would be online already. So when you do interviews, for example, you practice physical distancing, but sometimes you have to just simply go online to normal. And sometimes you have to accept the fact that certain government officials wouldn't want to be directly confronted in terms of you asking the hard question. So sometimes there are compromises that you have to make. Of course, physical distancing would become an absolute necessity. Sometimes you just have to interview online. But for public officials, my suggestion here is for media to still demand that there will still be press conferences wherein there will be physical interactions or face-to-face interactions among journalists while observing physical distancing at the same time. In other countries, it's being done. We cannot afford to have virtual pressers as the new normal, where you have, let's say, a DOH official giving a briefing, and then they're reading out loud the questions from the press because they are screening the questions in the process. They can choose to ignore certain questions, or due to lack of time, they can say that all of these other questions would have to be, answered at a later time. We have to accept certain aspects of life that would protect us from the virus. Physical distancing, I think, would have to be the new normal. But other aspects, we have to find ways to really still be able to ask the hard questions because we cannot compromise content just because of the so-called new normal.
Sir, this will be the last question for tonight since medyo naging comprehensive naman po yung discussions at insights po natin. Kanina po na-mention po ninyo yung solidarity, yung importance ng united action ng media. How can solidarity exist in a very competitive environment such as the media industry? Kasi I think nagiging question po yan ngayon kasi there are some networks na hindi talaga supportive of the ABS-CBN shutdown, ginagatungan pa nila. Minsan yung iba nagpa-publish pa ng content na in support of the shutdown. So, in an environment, gaya nga nasabi ni Dean Chodoro na may mga cutthroat competition, etc., paano po magkakaroon ng solidarity sa ganong sitwasyon?
Okay, that's a good question. It all boils down to the kind of unity that we want among people. Definitely, it's not ideological. It's not even political in the sense that we are after the propping up of a certain political party in the 2022 election. This is about press freedom. And I think press freedom is broad enough to unite people from different walks of life, different political beliefs, You can even unite the so-called yellows with the so-called red lockdown, or even just simply the fan clubs of certain celebrities. Okay, it can start like that. We can say that the fan clubs of certain celebrities of ABS-CBN would come in support of ABS-CBN because they don't want their favorite celebrities to lose their livelihood. Okay, they still want to watch them on air. But the challenge for all of us would be to convince this fan club that, you know, your cause is very, very valid, but of course, there is this cause of press freedom. And if we can explain it properly in a language that they can understand, perhaps we can win them over. So we start with something broad, and then we go deeper into the issues of the day. And hopefully, we can even say that we are after them making we are after our agenda ultimately would be to make people realize that our campaign is beyond ABS-CBN because ABS-CBN is just a reflection of the bigger problem of the death of press freedom. So we take it one step at a time. In other words, we take baby steps. And we don't discriminate, by the way, as regards people who would want to join the cause. Because from my experience, I have to be honest with you, there were people joining the Black Friday protest at ABS-CBN, but they are actually Duterte supporters. But they don't like what Duterte is doing with ABS-CBN. So in other words, they agree for the most part with Duterte's policies and programs. They even support federalism, but they are against what's happening. Okay? So you don't discriminate against them and you try to win them over. And hopefully, by winning them over, you try to provide conversations with them so that eventually they will realize that there is a bigger cause than this. So it is in this context that I appreciate, forums like this so that we can also help solidify the ranks of people who are undecided. And for those who are watching right now, I hope that with this discussion, you would be even more interested to learn the nuances of press freedom. Because after all, press freedom is not just for the journalists and media workers, it's for all of us. Because if there is a free press, we can have a more informed, critical, enlightened, and empowered citizenry.
And with that, thank you very much, Professor Danilo Aro, for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'd also like to thank our media partners, Squeeze and Now You Know. If you'd like to know more about NSP, please like our page to know more about what we do and how you can join in on the conversation. Muli, ito po ang Town Hall brought to you by the National Society of Parliamentarians. Good night, everyone. Salamat, sir.
Salamat,
Oh,
sir.
good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll be watching this. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you po.
Yes, bye-bye.